Oh, sorry, it's really hot here. We're going to be learning about Hillel today. Hillel was a really important leader at the beginning of the rabbinic period, though he wasn't himself a rabbi. He was said to have been born in Babylon about a century before the Common Era started. These are the magnificent Ishtar gates of Babylon that the exiles from Judah would have passed through as they arrived some 500 years earlier, and which Hillel would have passed out of as he set off back for Jerusalem. We're told that Hillel went to study in Jerusalem at the age of 40, about 70 years here before the Common Era. So he would have witnessed King Herod becoming king over Judea some years later. Hillel went to Jerusalem to study biblical tradition and how to apply it to the needs of his own times, at the feet of the two greatest teachers of that time, Shemaiah and Avtalion. This is said to be their burial site in the Galilee in northern Israel. Inside, you can still see their graves. Hillel had a burning desire to study Torah, but he could only get work as a wood chopper. Torah study was limited to those who could afford to pay for it. Oh, being high in the Judean hills, Jerusalem can get cold, and on a freezing snowy day, Hillel did not have enough money left to pay to study, so he climbed onto the roof of the study hall and lay down by the skylight to listen to the lecture until he was covered in snow and blocking the light. When the scholars below noticed him, they brought him down and warmed him up and changed the policy so that anyone who wished to study could come in and do so. We know the stories about Hillel from the first collection of the rabbinic period called the Mishnah, but the Mishnah was not written down until about 200 years later. The Mishnah has 6 sections. We might say one for every day of the week except Shabbat. One valuable part is called Pirkei Avot, Sayings of the Sages, which records many of Hillel's wise sayings. Hillel says that Moses' brother Aaron, the first high priest back in biblical times, was a great model to be like because of his love of peace and his love for others and teaching the Torah. Hillel considered love of others as the heart of Jewish teaching. Indeed, love your neighbor as you love yourself is exactly at the middle of the Torah, in the middle of the middle book, Vayikra, Leviticus. And we still read it every Yom Kippur afternoon. Lo tizna et achicha bilvavecha, hocheach tochiach et amitecha velo tisa alav chet. You shall not hate your neighbor in your heart. You should certainly tell someone if they've done wrong, so that you do not share the guilt. Lo tikom velo titor et bnei amecha, v'ahavta l'reecha kamocha, ani Adonai. You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge against your neighbor. Love your fellow as yourself. I am the Eternal One. If you do a Google search on love your neighbor as you love yourself, you'll find the Christian Gospels of Matthew and Mark come up first, and most people think these are Jesus's words. But remember that Jesus comes a generation after Hillel, and he is demonstrating that he knows the Jewish teachings. The most important commandment, says Jesus, is love your eternal God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. Hillel was known for his kindness, gentleness, patience, and concern for all humanity. We are told that once 2 men made a bet on whether they could make Hillel angry. One made rude comments about his Babylonian origin, but nothing he could say would upset Hillel. One of his best-known sayings is, Im ein ani li mili, if I am not for myself, then who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, then what am I? And if not now, when? Do not say when I have time I shall study, for perhaps you may never have time." These words have been made into a song to listen to later. Hillel ruled that we have a duty to care for our own bodies. He said, just as in the theatre or circus, the statues of the sovereign must be kept clean by those responsible for this task, so the bathing of the body, which is created in the image of the divine sovereign, is our responsibility. Generous consideration must be given to the needs of the poor. So when Hillel met a man of a rich family who had become poor, Hillel provided a horse for him to ride and a servant that he might not be shamed. Hillel's name might be familiar to you from a sandwich, the one we make with matzah on Seder night. Kind and gentle as he was, Hillel didn't want your throat to be too burnt, your eyes to water too much from the bitter herbs. And so he said, we should put the sweet charoset paste onto the maror between two pieces of matzah. Torah says, with matzah and maror, bitter herbs, they shall eat it. But as Hillel would point out, it doesn't say with matzah and bitter herb alone they shall eat it. Hillel knew and loved and respected the Torah and the biblical teachings, but sometimes it caused difficulties that he had the courage to address. We're now going to look at a part of Deuteronomy that you should have studied earlier and should have in front of you. Hillel became recognized as the highest authority among the community and was even able to introduce rulings that seemed to contradict the written Torah. Although the intention of the Deuteronomy passage you have studied was clearly to avoid poverty, in practice, people with money would not lend it to those in need as the seventh year approached, since they all knew it would never have to be paid back. So the poor became even poorer and could not borrow money to buy seeds, to sow, to grow food for their families. So Hillel looked very carefully at the text. He knew that the intent was clearly stated. What he noticed was that the instruction was addressed to a Baal, an individual with money. So he ruled that a group of people was not an individual. If a Bet Din, a house of law, lent the money, it had no obligation to cancel the debt, since it was not an individual. This clever ruling is known by a Greek word prosbul, before the court, and it prevented the needy from going hungry. In one of the 6 sections of the Mishnah, we find the idea of tikkun olam, fixing the world. Hillel hitkin prosbul mipnei tikkun olam. Hillel instituted the prosbul because of tikkun olam. Generations later, the rabbis introduced the phrase letaken olam b'malchut shaddai, to perfect or heal or fix the world under God's sovereignty, into the Aleinu prayer. You'll find it on page 589 in our Siddur. Hillel is not referred to as Rabbi Hillel because the title was not yet in use. However, in the modern era, some people respectfully but incorrectly call him Rabbi. Because of his great humility and wisdom, Hillel became the most influential force in Jewish life in Judea. Hillel died in the year 10 of the Common Era. According to a story in the creative rabbinic collection of the Midrash, he was 120 years old. Moses was said to have died at 120, so this suggests the rabbis coming after him are equating Hillel's importance to Moses, the great shaper of the rabbinic period, as Moses was the great shaper of the biblical period. They said the same about 2 other great teachers we'll meet as well, Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabbi Akiva. Many wise sayings are attributed to Hillel. For example, do not judge your fellow until you're in their place. And a person who takes a life, it's as though they destroyed the entire world. And whoever saves a life, it's as though they'd saved the entire world. Where there are no decent people, strive to be one. However, at least 2 other notable Hillels came after him, and some scholars have suggested that some of the sayings attributed to Hillel may have originated from them. Hillel's amazing 40 years of religious leadership covered the period about 30 before the Common Era to 10 of the Common Era.